Hello, hello. Wonderful to have you here. I hope you're having a wonderful day, a wonderful summer. It's beautiful here today. And what I wanted to do was to talk a little bit about the Buddha's views on the correct use of wealth. In particular, what the wealthy should be doing, basically. At least one aspect of that. Now, just as background, within this country, the United States, we do have a very serious, in my opinion, very serious problem with wealth inequality. This is something that's been going on, but it's been growing since the 1970s. Statistics show this quite clearly. And it's gotten to a point now where there is a certain very, very small segment of society, it's really even less than the 1%, it's really the 10th of 1% or less, who are so wealthy that they're able to live and act with near complete impunity to the law. And this is, I think, a threat to democracy. It's a threat to society in many, many ways. Now, of course, this is not the channel or the place to get into all of that, but it's something to keep, I think, in mind in the background when we're discussing the Buddha's views here. Now, to be clear, the Buddha was not at all opposed to people making an honest living, or even to people becoming wealthy by honest means. But the Buddha did expect people to use their wealth rather than simply to hoard it, rather than simply to keep it for themselves, off in a bank somewhere, or whatever the equivalent would have been in the 5th century before the Common Era in India. I discuss a bit of this in fact, quite a bit of this, I go into some detail about this in my course over at the Online Dharma Institute on Work, Money, and Pleasure. I'll leave a link to that course down in the show notes in case you haven't seen it or would like to take a look. So in any event, there are a number of interesting suttas where the Buddha discusses this issue of hoarding wealth and the proper use of wealth. In one example, King Pasenadi, who was a king back in the Buddha's day, goes to the Buddha to tell him of a wealthy financier who died without heir. And since this financier, this wealthy man, died and did not have anyone to give the money, to give his wealth to, the wealth went to the king, to King Pasenadi. And of course, the king didn't need this wealth. I mean, of course, he would have been happy to receive it, but it wasn't as though he needed it. And so he was sort of basically lamenting to the Buddha about this situation. Apparently, this financier, it's said in the sutta, had something like 8 million in gold coins and even more in silver. So he was, by all accounts, extremely wealthy. And here's the interesting thing. They say that this financier lived a very, we might say, minimalist lifestyle. He didn't spend much on food or drink. He didn't spend much on clothes. He had very, very modest clothes. He had a very dilapidated cart that he went around in. So again, we might say that he was miserly. He didn't spend a lot on anything. And coming from our own background, we might say, well, this shows that he lived, again, what we might call a minimalist lifestyle. He was somebody who was very austere in how he spent his fortune. And we might also think, therefore, that's a good thing, that this was a good way that this financier lived his life. However, again, interestingly, that is not the Buddha's take. Here's what the Buddha had to say. When a bad person has acquired exceptional wealth, they don't make themselves happy and pleased. Nor do they make their mother and father, partners and children, bondservants, workers and staff, and friends and colleagues happy and pleased. And they don't establish an uplifting religious donation for ascetics and Brahmins that's conducive to heaven, ripens in happiness, and leads to heaven. Because they haven't made proper use of that wealth, rulers or bandits take it, or fire consumes it, or flood sweeps it away, or unloved heirs take it. Since that wealth is not properly utilized, it's wasted, not used. In other words, what the Buddha is telling us is that wealth, insofar as we have it, is there to be used. It's there to make ourselves and other people happy. It's there in order to donate to worthy causes. It's not simply something to pile up. Part of the reason for this, the Buddha is saying, is that if wealth is not used, then it has to be protected. It has to be kept safe away from bandits, fire, and other traumas, basically, that might destroy that wealth or might fritter it away, might give it to the wrong person. The bandit might take it or something like that. And all of this causes us stress. We have to be careful and caring with the wealth, rather than, again, making use of it to make people happy. And the Buddha compares unused wealth to a beautiful, clear lotus pond that is off in a forest somewhere that nobody ever gets to see. He says that such a pond, since it is not, people can't swim in it, people don't swim in it, people don't see it, people aren't able to enjoy the lotus pond, therefore it's kind of a waste. According to the Buddha, in this, at least in this simile, in this metaphor here, the lotus pond is kind of a waste, in the same way that the hoarded wealth of this stingy financier is also, in a sense, wasted. Unlike the bad person, the Buddha says, the good person makes use of his or her wealth to make people around them happy, to make himself or herself happy. As well, they donate, the Buddha says, to ascetics and Brahmins, by which he means basically ethically minded religious people, good practicing religious people of the age of the time in which the Buddha was speaking. Now, I think it's unproblematic to say that the one could donate it to other kinds of worthy causes. We can think of dozens or hundreds of worthy causes around us in the world today. The Buddha is basically saying that one should donate, one should spread out one's wealth rather than hoarding it. There's been a recent occurrence within the United States of I believe it's called the Giving Pledge, where very, very wealthy people pledge to give the vast majority of their wealth to worthy causes. Now, we can, of course, very easily debate whether people should have that kind of wealth to begin with, but I think it's relatively, at least, uncontroversial that if people have the wealth, it's better that they distribute it around to worthy causes rather than simply piling it up for the sake of themselves or their families for the indefinite future. In another very similar sutta, indeed an almost identical one, the Buddha talks about another financier who was equally austere and equally miserly and also died without an heir. And it's said that this financier in a prior lifetime had indeed been generous, had donated to some worthy causes. But having donated, he regretted that donation. He regretted having been having been generous. He decided to be miserly. His decision was that miserliness was better than generosity. And as a result, the Buddha says, as a result of that deed, his mind didn't tend to enjoy nice food, clothes, vehicles, or the 5 refined kinds of sensual stimulation. That is to say, and this is, I think, quite interesting, the Buddha is suggesting here that the reason why this financier was incapable of taking pleasure in the ordinary sense pleasures of life that most of us take pleasure in, the reason for that was because of this miserliness in a past life, this unwillingness to donate to worthy causes, this unwillingness to be generous. And here we can see one of many examples in the early texts of the way that the Buddha's teaching is directed, at least at times, at lay concerns, at the concerns of non-monastics. Because basically what he's saying is that it's perfectly ordinary, indeed to an extent even laudable, for lay people to enjoy their lives and to use their wealth in ways that makes their lives and the lives of others around them more pleasurable. As the Buddha says, or at least as he suggests here, it's our past generosity that makes us capable of enjoying the benefits of life in this life, or at least right now. Having been generous in the past makes us more open to the pleasures of life right now. And this is particularly interesting because, as we know, or at least some of us may know, in the the, should we say, broader or more exalted path towards enlightenment, sense pleasures are a danger, are all a danger, should all be seen as dangerous. And so, from the point of view of that more exalted path, we might say that these pleasures of food, clothes, vehicles, or the 5 refined kinds of sensual stimulation, which, by the way, means the 5 senses, sensual stimulation from the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body. Those are the 5 kinds of refined sensual stimulation. All of those are really to be concerned with, not to go out and find pleasure in, because those pleasures are themselves liable to create attachments, right? So what I'm saying here is that in these suttas, the Buddha is saying that pleasure is sometimes beneficial for lay people in certain contexts, in the contexts of the spending of wealth, for example. Another way to put this is that we're really supposed in the final analysis in Buddhism to avoid these kinds of attachments to sensory stimulation, to sensory pleasures, but not out of some miserly desire to hoard our wealth. And what we were seeing in the example of these 2 financiers is that, yes, they were avoiding sensual pleasures, but only out of a miserly desire not to expend their wealth. And that kind of motivation is a motivation that, in the final analysis, comes from attachment. It's an attachment to that very wealth. It's an identification with their status as wealthy financiers that disallowed them, that blocked them from being able to enjoy that wealth. And this here is a problem in early Buddhism. Now, I actually did a past video on the difference between the Buddha and Jesus on wealth, because both of them have really quite interesting takes here, and I know the discussion of Jesus is somewhat outside the scope of this channel in general, but at least I know a little bit about that, not having had that in my past, but having studied it in school, having studied it at university and in graduate school, I know a bit about it. And so I think that is a very interesting and I think telling distinction between these 2 figures, because both of them had problems with wealth, but in different ways. So I'll leave a link to that video up here on the screen. It's quite an old one of mine if you haven't seen it, or if you'd like to refresh your memory. If you're getting something out of these videos of mine, consider taking a look over at my Patreon page and seeing if you want to help support the channel and the work that we're all doing here. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next video, and meanwhile, all of you, be well.